the 6'2" Navy SEAL. The 6'2" Navy SEAL had already broken a security guard's wrist and put a doctor through a supply cart when the smallest person in the emergency room stepped forward. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The man weighed 240 of pure combat muscle, had 3 bullet wounds still leaking through his bandages, and was currently trying to tear a medical monitor off the wall with his bare hands. And the woman walking toward him was a nurse everyone in that hospital had spent months laughing at. She said 2 words, just 2, and the most dangerous man in the room dropped to his knees. The silence that followed lasted 11 seconds. Nobody who witnessed it ever forgot it. Before this story goes any further, if you've never been here before, hit that subscribe button right now, because this channel is where stories like this live. Stories about people who were written off, pushed down, dismissed, and then showed the world exactly who they were. Hit the like button if you're already feeling it, and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning. The thing about Coastal Mercy Medical Centers was that it smelled like burnt coffee and quiet desperation by 6 in the morning, and by noon, it smelled like the same things, only louder. It sat 3 miles from the naval station in Port Calder, Virginia, mid-city, that existed largely to service the military installations surrounding it, and, as a result, the emergency department moved at a pace that wore people down fast. Nurses who arrived ambitious left pragmatic. Pragmatic ones left tired. Tired ones stayed because they had nowhere else to go. Sarah Novak had been there 14 months. By most accounts, she should have already been gone. She was 29, small-framed, quiet in a way that read as timid rather than controlled, and she had a habit of hesitating half a beat before she spoke that the senior staff had long since decided meant she wasn't confident. Her hand sometimes shook when she drew blood, not badly, not dangerously, but enough that 2 nurses on the floor had started calling her trembles behind her back, and sometimes not quite behind it. Dr. Garrett Voss, the department's chief attending, and the man whose approval or disapproval set the social temperature of every shift, had made his position on Sarah Novak clear within her first month. He'd watched her take too long with a peripheral IV on a pediatric patient, sighed loud enough for the room to hear, stepped in front of her without a word, and finished it himself. Then he'd looked at the charge nurse and said, "Move her to triage." Simple cases only, as if Sarah weren't standing 18 inches away. She had not said anything. She had nodded, gathered her supplies, and walked to the triage station. The shaking in her hands Dr. Voss never noticed, stopped the moment she turned her back on him. That was 14 months ago. Since then, the routine had calcified. Sarah worked triage. Sarah filed paperwork faster than anyone on the floor, but was never credited for it. Sarah was assigned the difficult family members, the confused elderly patients, the people who needed time and patience rather than speed, because everyone had quietly agreed she couldn't handle anything more critical. When the genuinely complex cases came through the multi-trauma, the surgical emergencies, cases that required someone who could think faster than the situation, Sarah was eased to the side with the practice of people who'd been doing it for over a year, and she let them do it. She never explained herself. The staff called it passivity. The charge nurse, Dina Rourke, who was not unkind but was practical above everything, had told Sarah plainly in her 6-month review, "You've got good instincts. Problem is you don't trust them. And if you don't trust yourself, nobody else is going to do it for you." Sarah had thanked her for the feedback. She had not corrected her, because Dina Rourke didn't know what Sarah Novak's instincts were actually calibrated to. The shift that would break everything open started like most shifts started badly. There had been a 3-vehicle accident on the interstate connector outside Port Calder at 5:40 in the morning, which meant by the time Sarah arrived for her 7 o'clock. Start the department was already running 15 patients short of beds, 2 nurses short of staff, and entirely short of patients. Voss was at the center of it, the way he always was. loud and efficient, and making sure everyone within 40 feet understood that the department's performance reflected his leadership when things went well and other people's failures when they didn't. Novik. He caught her at the nursing station before she'd finished logging in. We've got a backlog in waiting. 14 patients, mostly non-critical. You're on it. I saw the board. I can take 2 of the trauma overflow, Bay 6 and Bay 8 look manageable. I didn't ask what you thought you could manage. He didn't look up from the chart he was reviewing. Waiting room, non-critical. That's where you're useful. She stood there for exactly 1 second, long enough to decide, again, that this wasn't the moment. Then she picked up a triage clipboard and went to the waiting room. It wasn't passivity. It had never been passivity. It was calculation. There was a woman in the corner of the waiting area, mid-60s, pressing a folded grocery receipt to the back of her hand. The receipt was soaked. Sarah was at her side before she'd fully processed the decision to move, gloved and assessing, finding a deep, jagged laceration that had nicked a superficial vein. How long ago? Sarah asked. Maybe an hour. My daughter made me come in. Told her it was fine. It's not fine, but it's fixable. Sarah was already applying direct pressure with proper gauze, scanning the woman's face for pallor, checking her pupils out of pure reflex. Any blood thinners? Heart medication? Warfarin. My cardiologist. I need your last INR, if you have it. The woman blinked. My INR? How did you? It's on your medical alert bracelet. Sarah nodded toward the woman's wrist. It says anticoagulant therapy. When was your last check? The woman stared at her. 2 weeks ago. It was 3.1. Okay. Sarah's hands were already moving with a precision and economy she didn't perform for the waiting room audience. She performed it because it was the only way she knew how to move when something actually needed doing. You're going to need a couple of sutures in some time. I'm going to get you into a room. The young man at the desk said it could be 2 hours. I'm telling you differently. She caught the eye of the tech near the hallway and signaled without breaking her attention from the patient. 15 minutes. She had the woman sutured, monitored for pressure response, and waiting on a repeat INR within 40 minutes faster than most attending physicians would have managed the consult alone. She documented everything, flagged the anticoagulation concern, and moved to the next patient before anyone in the main department thought to check on her. The waiting room didn't see her as anything special. It never did. That was fine. By mid-morning, the department had absorbed the accident overflow, lost another nurse to a family emergency, and Voss had loudly blamed the delayed charting on the triage team, which meant Sarah, even though her documentation was current and the delay was rooted in a registration system error that had nothing to do with clinical staff. Sarah heard it from across the station. She kept typing. Marcus Webb, one of the ear attendings she actually respected, younger than Voss, less politically invested, appeared at her shoulder. For what it's worth, I checked. Your charts were fine. I know they were. He hesitated. You should say something. To who? He didn't have an answer for that, which was its own answer, and he went back to his patients. Sarah finished her documentation and started the next one. The morning wore on. The backlog thinned. The department reached something approaching a sustainable pace by 11:30, and then at 11:47, the radio crackled, and everything changed. Paramedics' voice over dispatch was controlled in the specific way that meant the situation was not controlled at all. Coastal Mercy ER, incoming critical. Single patient, male, approximately mid-30s. Multiple GSW, at least 2 thoracic, 1 abdominal. Significant blood loss, pressure dropping, altered mentation. Patient is combative. I want to emphasize that. Combative. We've had to restrain for transport. TA 6 minutes. This is a military transfer, and we have been advised a brief pause, the kind that meant someone had said something over radio. The medic wasn't sure how to relate to advise your team that the patient should be approached with caution. Voss took the radio himself. What does that mean? Caution. Sir, the patient took down 2 military police officers at the forward staging point before we could get him loaded. He has 3 gunshot wounds, and he took down 2 MPs. I'm just telling you what they told me. The department shifted into a different gear. It was subtle, the way voices dropped half a register, the way movement became more purposeful, but Sarah felt it, the way she always felt those shifts, in her sternum, like a key turning. She stepped away from the triage station and moved toward Trauma Bay 1 without being asked. Novak. Dina Rourke caught her arm, not unkindly. This one's not for you. I know the protocol, Sarah said. Then you know I'm not putting you in that bay. Sarah looked at her. Who do you have? Voss is primary. Morrison on assist. Security has been called up from downstairs. You have 6 people who've never worked a combat PTSD episode. Dina's expression shifted by a fraction. What did you say? What the medic described isn't a combative patient. Dissociation under trauma. Sarah kept her voice flat. If your team goes in there loud and aggressive, you're going to escalate him. You could lose him before you get a line in. And you know this because I've seen it. She held Dina's gaze. Let me be in the room. Not primary. I'll stand back. But let me be in the room. Dina studied her for 3 seconds. Then she stepped aside. The ambulance bay doors opened at 11:53, and the gurney came through fast. 2 paramedics working in controlled urgency, patient already straining against the soft restraints at his wrists with a mechanical persistence that suggested he had been doing it for the entire 6-minute transport and would continue doing it indefinitely. Sarah saw him and felt something hit her in the chest that was not clinical and not professional, and that she had not felt in 3 years. He was big, that had not been an exaggeration, with close-cropped dark hair, matted on one side, with blood that had dried rust brown, a jaw set hard, even in altered mentation, and a network of older scars across his forearms and the visible portion of his left shoulder that told anyone who knew how to read them a story about multiple deployments and the things that happened during them. His eyes were open, but not present. They were locked on something nobody else in the room could see, focused and horrified and 3,000 miles away. Get those restraints transferred to the gurney rails, Voss said, moving into the bay with his team. I want 2 large-bore IVs, type and cross, chest X-ray. Patient moved. It was not flailing. It was not random. His right arm came up with an economy of motion that should not have been possible for a man losing blood at that rate, and the nearest paramedic stumbled back and hit the wall, not injured, but rattled. And suddenly there was a 2-foot gap in the circle of personnel around the gurney. Get him down, Voss snapped. 2 members of the security team moved in. Patient caught the first one by the forearm, and the trajectory of that arm's movement made Sarah's breath stop because she recognized it. She recognized the specific combat response it came from. Recognized the training that produced it. Recognized what it meant about where this man's mind currently was and what he believed he was defending himself from. Stop. Her voice came out before she'd made a conscious decision, and it was not the voice she used in the ER. It was a different register, a different cadence, stripped down to its components. Everyone stopped moving. Voss turned on her. Novak, get out. If your security team grabs him right now, someone is going to get seriously hurt, and it won't be him. She was already moving forward, slowly, no sudden motion, her hands open at her sides. Give me 30 seconds. This isn't your call. 30 seconds. She didn't look at Voss. Kept her eyes on the patient. That's all I'm asking. Something in her tone made the room hold. She moved to within 5 feet of the gurney and stopped. The patient's eyes were locked on the ceiling, but his body was tracking her. She could see the micro-adjustments in his posture, the way his weight shifted, threat assessing even through the fog. Sarah took 1 breath, let it out slowly. You're not there, she said. Not loud, not soft. Level, wherever you are right now, you're not there. You're in Virginia. You're in a hospital. His eyes didn't move. People around you are medical staff. Nobody here is a threat. She took one step closer. Took rounds. You made it out. You're in a hospital in Virginia. Something shifted in his face. Fractional. The jaw still tight, but the eyes moved toward her. Not focused yet, but moving. She had 3 more seconds before the window closed. She knew that with the certainty of someone who had lived in those seconds before. She leaned forward and spoke quietly, so only he could hear. She said a name, not his name. A different name, 2 syllables, a designation, the kind of identifier that existed only inside a specific operational context that no civilian would have any reason to know. His entire body went still. She watched it happen, watched the combat response drain out of him, like pressure from a line, watched his eyes come back from wherever they'd been and land on her face, and she saw the moment he actually saw her. "That's not possible," he said. His voice was wrecked, hoarse from whatever he'd been through before the hospital. "You're..." "Later," she said. "Right now, I need you to let the medical team do their job. Do you understand?" A long pause. His eyes moved over her face, like he was checking for something he wasn't sure was real. Then slowly, he lay back against the gurney. The room held its breath for another full second before Voss moved back in, and this time the patient didn't react. Sarah stepped to the outer edge of the bay and let the team work. Her face was composed, her hands were still. Nothing about her in that moment looked like the nurse who shook during blood draws and got bumped from trauma cases. Nobody in the room said anything to her directly. But Marcus Webb, standing near the door, was watching her with an expression she'd gotten very good at recognizing over the past 3 years. The look of someone recalculating. His name, according to the military liaison, who arrived 11 minutes after the ambulance, was Staff Sergeant Damon Reeves, and he was not supposed to be here. That was the exact phrasing the liaison used, delivered quietly to Doctor Voss in the hallway outside Trauma Bay 1, while the surgical team worked inside. "He's not supposed to be here, and I need to understand how this transfer was authorized. Because as of 48 hours ago, this individual was listed as being held at a forward medical facility." "I don't know anything about that," Voss said. "He came through standard trauma transfer channels. Transfer authorization has a clearance level attached to it that I don't have." The liaison, a compact officer in his late 40s named, according to his badge, Major Cole Driscoll, said this in the tone of someone who was not used to not having clearance for things. "I need to know who signed it. I'll have admin pull the paperwork. I need it in the next 20 minutes. You'll get it." Driscoll's jaw tightened, and he walked to the far end of the hallway, pulling out his phone. Sarah, restocking the crash cart in the adjacent bay, heard all of it. She kept moving, restocked the cart, checked the defibrillator pads, counted ampoules. Her face showed nothing, but her mind was very busy. Reeves came out of initial surgery 2 hours later, blood pressure stabilized but still precarious, and was moved to a monitored room on the 4th floor that the military liaison had requested be restricted to authorized personnel. Voss took the restriction as an insult to his departmental authorities and said so to the charge nurse, who was apparently now the primary audience for his complaints. Sarah was not in that conversation. She was in the break room on the 3rd floor, eating a granola bar she didn't taste, running through what she knew and what she didn't, and what the gap between those things meant. Damon Reeves. She hadn't used that designation she'd whispered in the trauma bay in 3 years. She hadn't said it aloud, hadn't written it, hadn't let herself think it in a way that could travel through her expression. She'd chosen the name Sarah Novak. At the same time, she'd chosen the city of Port Calder, the nursing certification, the small apartment with the second-hand furniture, careful construction of ordinary. She'd been methodical about it. Methodical in the way that her previous life had made her, the life that predated the hospital and the granola bars and Garrett Voss and all of it. Reeves had been part of that life. The fact that he was here, in this hospital, In this city, with a bullet wound pattern that told a very specific story about the kind of mission that produced it, that was not coincidence. She was certain of that. She was trained to be certain of that. Question was whether anyone else knew. She finished the granola bar, folded the wrapper into a square, and placed it in the trash. Then she went back to work, because going back to work was the only appropriate response to everything and nothing. And she had learned a long time ago that staying in motion was how you survived the things that wanted to catch you. She was pulled from the afternoon triage rotation at 4:15 by Dina Rourke, who did not look like a woman delivering routine news. Voss wants to see you. Sarah set down her clipboard. About what? He didn't say. His office. Voss's office was a glass-walled room at the corner of the administrative section that he kept impeccably organized, which Sarah had always found useful information about the man. People who needed their physical surroundings controlled were people who felt perpetually at risk of things sliding out of their grip. He was standing when she came in, which meant he'd already decided on a posture. Close the door. She closed it. I had a conversation with Major Driscoll this afternoon. Voss didn't offer her a seat, which was deliberate. He has some questions about what happened in the trauma bay this morning. De-escalated a patient in crisis. You intervened in a trauma response without authorization and used an unknown verbal trigger on a military patient. He kept his voice even, but there was something underneath it she recognized as unease. Driscoll wants to know where you learned it. De-escalation training. That's not what that was. His eyes held hers. I've been doing this for 18 years. I've seen de-escalation. That was something else. A pause. Who are you? She looked at him. The question was direct, which she respected even if the context wasn't. I'm Sarah Novak. I'm a registered nurse. I've been working in your department for 14 months. And before that, I trained in Portland. My credentials are on file. Credentials are on file, he repeated. Yes, they are. And this morning a military officer told me he has reason to believe that the person who treated his patient may not be who their file says they are. He let that sit. Is there anything you want to tell me, Novak? She considered him for exactly the amount of time it took to determine that this was not the room and not the moment for anything other than the performance she'd been giving for 14 months. No, she said. There isn't. The pause stretched. I'm putting you on administrative leave pending a review of this morning's incident, Voss said. Effective immediately. You'll be paid. You won't be on the floor. HR will schedule a meeting. She absorbed this. And patient care is not your concern right now? She nodded once. Okay. His expression shifted. She thought he'd expected more resistance or maybe more fear, and the absence of both made him uncertain. She let him be uncertain. It cost her nothing. She went to her locker, retrieved her bag, and left the building at 4:22 in the afternoon. She drove to the Naval Station Perimeter Road, not through the gate, just to the edge of the fence line where the road curved toward the water, and sat in her car for a while with the engine off. The bay was gray that afternoon, the kind of November gray that looked like it had weight to it, and the gulls were working the shoreline with industrial focus. Damon Reeves. He had looked at her in the trauma bay, the way you look at something you've been told doesn't exist. She knew that look. She'd given it herself once to a person she'd buried in every operational record she had access to. The name she'd whispered to him the identifier. The call sign was not in any unclassified record. It had existed inside a specific operational context with a specific team on a specific mission that the Department of Defense had classified at a level that meant it effectively had not happened. Reeves had heard it and gone still the way a frequency goes still when you hit exactly the right signal, which meant he knew who she was. And Major Cole Driscoll, who had arrived 11 minutes after the ambulance and was asking questions about transfer authorizations with clearance levels he didn't have. Driscoll knew something too. Maybe not all of it, but enough to be standing in a Virginia hospital with his jaw tight and his phone in his hand. She had built Sarah Novak carefully, methodically, the way you build anything that needs to hold weight. The question was whether that structure was still standing. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Virginia area code, but not one she recognized. Picked it up. Silence on the line for 2 seconds. Then a voice she recognized immediately, though it was rougher than she remembered it, hospital-worn and medicated at the edges. "I know you told me later," Reeves said, "but I need to tell you something first. Before Driscoll finds a way to be in the same room as you," kept her voice flat, "you should be on a monitored floor. I know. I've got about 4 minutes before someone notices. Listen." His voice dropped. "The transfer wasn't authorized by anyone you'd know. It was authorized by someone I was running an information for. Information about what happened on the operation that put me in your ER." She waited. "They know there's a witness." His breathing was effortful, the way breathing gets when you're talking through pain medication on a chest wound. "They've been looking for her for 2 years. And Driscoll minus. Reeves. He's not who his badge says he is." The line went quiet for a moment. Outside her windshield, the bay stayed gray and indifferent, and the gulls kept working. "4 minutes is up," she said. "Sarah, get off the phone. Stay on the floor. Don't tell anyone you called." She ended the call. Sat with her hands on the steering wheel for exactly long enough to acknowledge what was happening and decide what she was going to do about it. Then she started the car. Because Damon Reeves was in a 4th-floor room with restricted access and a compromised military liaison and 3 bullet wounds he had not fully explained, and Sarah Novak was on administrative leave, and the woman's Sarah Novak had been built on top of, had not survived 3 years of careful invisibility to let a wounded soldier face this alone in a hospital full of people who didn't know what they were walking into. She pulled out of the perimeter road and turned back toward Coastal Mercy. The badge in her bag still worked. She hadn't been terminated. She'd been suspended. There was a difference. She intended to use it. She pulled back into the Coastal Mercy parking structure at 451, took the stairwell to the 2nd floor to avoid the main lobby cameras, and used her badge at the side entrance that connected the administrative wing to the clinical corridors. The badge reader beeped green. She moved through the hallway at the pace of someone who belonged there, which she had learned was the only pace that mattered. Not hurrying, not hesitating. The specific velocity of ordinary purpose. She'd worn scrubs home, out of habit that morning, which helped. She still had her ID clipped at her chest. The hospital was shift change busy, which also helped. Shift change was the exact window when nobody was tracking individuals, because everyone was tracking information. The handoff of patients and problems, and the accumulated weight of one more ER day. She took the elevator to the 4th floor. The corridor outside Reeves's room had one security guard, not military, hospital security. A heavy-set man in his 50s named Petrie, whose schedule Sarah had memorized over the past year, because she had memorized everyone's schedule the way she memorized everything. As basic operational awareness, she'd never fully been able to turn off. Petrie did a hallway walk every 20 minutes. She had arrived in the 9-minute window between his last walk and his next one. She knocked twice, waited, knocked once more. "It's open," Reeves said. He looked worse under the fluorescent light than he'd looked in the trauma bay, which was saying something. His color was poor, the blood pressure cuff on his arm reading numbers that were acceptable but not comfortable, and the eye line at his left hand was doing steady work. Someone had cleaned the dried blood from his hairline, but done it roughly. She could see. The skin was irritated at the temple, a red streak that hadn't been addressed, and there was a tension in his face. That was not pain medication, but awareness. The specific alertness of a man who knew he was exposed and was managing it with his jaw. Sarah closed the door behind her, did not go to him immediately. Checked the window 4th floor, facing the parking structure, Venetian blinds, adequate, then checked the room's 2nd entrance, a bathroom door with no external access. Then she pulled the visitor chair from beside the wall and sat down at an angle from the bed that put her back partially toward the door, but gave her the full room in her peripheral field. It was not a consciously performed action. It was how she sat. Reeves watched her do all of it. When she finally settled, something in his expression shifted, not quite relief, not quite recognition. Something between the two. "You still do that," he said. "Do what? Clear a room before you sit down." She didn't respond to that. "Tell me about the operation." Closed his eyes briefly. "No hello? No glad you're not dead, Reeves?" "I'm glad you're not dead. Tell me about the operation." He exhaled through his nose, the way people exhaled when they were working around pain they didn't want to admit. It was a recovery mission. Target was a cache of operational data from a forward asset who'd been compromised. Simple extraction, 6 hours in country, nothing we hadn't done before. Who was the asset? Silence, Reeves. "Someone you'd recognize the name of," he said. "And I'm not saying it in a room I haven't swept." She absorbed this. "Okay, what went wrong? The site wasn't compromised by the enemy." He said it the way you said things that you'd been turning over for a long time, things that had worn grooves in your thinking. "Someone fed us. Bad coordinates. 2 clicks off, put us right into a security perimeter. We took fire the moment we sat down." He shifted against the pillow, and she watched him manage the wince with the focused unpleasantness of someone who'd had a lot of practice. "Rawlings and Foote went down in the first 60 seconds. I got hit twice getting to cover. Martinez, you remember Martinez?" "I remember him. He got me to the exfil point. He took a round doing it." A pause. "He didn't make it to the bird." The room was quiet for a moment. The monitor beeped its patient rhythm. "Someone inside fed you those coordinates," Sarah said. Not a question. And then the same someone made sure the incident report listed it as enemy intelligence failure. He looked at her directly. "No investigation, no inquiry. 3 men dead and 1 on a hospital gurney, and the official record says the mission was a success with acceptable casualties." "What did you recover?" "That's the thing." He said it quietly. "I didn't. The cache was gone when we reached the secondary target point. But Foote had a backup drive on him. Automatic upload to an encrypted partition when primary access failed." He paused. "I have the data." Sarah was very still. "Not physically," he added. "The drive is secured. But the data is real, and it names names, and the people it names are not people who react to that kind of thing calmly. Who knows you have it? The person who authorized my transfer here." He met her eyes. "And now you." She held his gaze. She had a great deal of experience with the specific weight of information nobody was supposed to have, and she recognized it settling onto her chest the way it always did. Not panic, not even urgency exactly, just a kind of recalibration. The world getting slightly heavier and her adjusting her stance in response. "Driscoll," she said. "Not military, or not only military." Reeves's voice was careful. He was embedded in the after-action review for the operation. He asked very specific questions about survivor accounts. He paused. The kind of questions you ask when you're looking for a leak, not when you're looking for the truth. She thought about Driscoll's expression in the hallway, the jaw, the phone, the tone of someone accustomed to having access. She thought about the clearance level on the transfer authorization that Driscoll himself didn't have, which meant the transfer had been arranged around him, or through channels he wasn't part of. "Someone moved you here to put you near me," she said slowly, "or to use you to get to me." His eyes didn't leave her face. "You were the only person from the old unit who disappeared cleanly. No body, no confirmed location. There were people who thought you were dead. There were people who were less certain, and someone decided that if they moved you here, I'd surface. That would be my red." He said it without apology. "I didn't know. I was unconscious for transport." She sat with that for a moment. The calculation was elegant in a way she found irritating, because elegance meant someone had thought it through, and people who thought things through were more dangerous than people who reacted. "Okay," she said. Okay, I need to think. Sarah, give me a minute. He gave her the minute. The monitor beeped. Outside in the corridor, she heard Petrie's footsteps starting their circuit. She tracked them by rhythm, counted the cadence, measured the time. He was running 3 seconds behind schedule, which meant he'd been delayed at the nursing station, and at the nursing station would compensate by moving faster. She stood up. Lay still, she told Reeves. Don't call anyone. Don't answer questions from Driscoll or anyone connected to him. If anyone besides the attending or the primary nurse comes in for any reason, you have a headache and you're confused about the timeline, and you were unconscious for most of the transport. And you? I'm going to find out who authorized your transfer. Caught her wrist as she moved past the bed. Light grip, more contact than restraint, and she stopped. He looked up at her with something that was more complicated than she had time for right now. I didn't surface you on purpose, he said. For what that's worth. She looked at his hand on her wrist. He released it, Simpson. I know, she said. Lay still. She was in the hallway and moving toward the elevator before Petrie's footsteps reached the corner. The hospital's administrative records were not her domain, but the nursing station on the second floor had terminal access to the patient transfer database through the standard intake system. And Sarah had spent 14 months learning exactly which terminals had longer session timeouts than hospital policy officially sanctioned. The station near the radiology corridor went unattended for stretches during shift change because the nurse assigned to it routinely covered a colleague's patients during handoff, a small human inefficiency that had annoyed Sarah from a patient care standpoint and now served an entirely different purpose. She sat down at the terminal, pulled up the transfer authorization for Damon Reeves, and found exactly what Driscoll had described. Clearance flag on the authorization that locked the originating signatory behind a military access code she couldn't break from a hospital terminal. But the routing information was visible. The transfer had been processed through a coordination office attached to a Naval Medical Administrative Unit that she knew by designation, but not by personnel. She navigated to the routing contact, an office code, a general line, nothing personal. She took a photo of the screen with her phone. Then she went one layer deeper into the intake notes, because intake notes were clinical rather than administrative and lived in a different database with different access controls. And there she found something that made her stop. Intake flag on Reeves's record had 2 entries. The first was the clinical flag from the ER Arrival Standard Trauma Protocol. The second had been added at 1422, which was after Reeves was out of surgery and on the 4th floor. It was a pharmacy flag. It noted that the attending had ordered a specific post-surgical analgesic protocol and that the pharmacy had confirmed the order and that all was well. A routine notation, the kind of thing that got added to records hundreds of times a day across the hospital without anyone looking twice. Except the timestamp on the pharmacy confirmation was 14 minutes before the attending had actually submitted the order. She read it twice to make sure she was reading it correctly. The pharmacy had confirmed a medication order 14 minutes before the order existed. She took a photo of that too, logged off the terminal, and stood in the radiology corridor for a moment working through what she was looking at. The most charitable explanation was a timestamp error, a server sync problem, a clerical mistake, the kind of technical hiccup that happened in large institutional systems. She didn't believe in the most charitable explanation when other explanations existed. If you wanted to alter someone's medication protocol without flagging a clinical change in the physician's record, you would need to either compromise the attending's login or enter the modification through a parallel pathway, the pharmacy confirmation, and backdate the authorization to make it look like physician originated. You would need internal access, and you would need to know the system well enough to bury it in routine documentation. The flag was small, the kind of thing you'd never notice if you weren't looking, kind of thing that was designed not to be noticed. Her heart rate was doing something she recognized and disliked the specific uptick of a situation clarifying, in a direction you didn't want it to go. Controlled her breathing. Assessed. The medication protocol for Reeves's case would be running now. Whatever had been entered would be running through his IV line if it had already been administered. She was back in the elevator inside of 45 seconds. The fourth-floor nursing station had a dispensing record she could access at the bedside terminal if she could get to it without triggering a question about why a suspended nurse was accessing patient records. She worked through this as she moved down the corridor, past Petrie, who was back at his post and who glanced at her and said, "Evening, Miss Novak," with the comfortable recognition of someone who had seen her in this building every working day for over a year and saw no reason tonight should be different. "Evening, Petrie." She kept walking. The attending on Reeves's floor tonight was a hospitalist named Doctor Edna Sue, who was methodical, experienced, and not the type to take kindly to a suspended ER nurse showing up on her floor asking questions. Sarah bypassed the nursing station entirely and went directly to Reeves's room. He was awake, still alert, which itself told her something, because a properly sedated post-surgical patient with his injuries should have been drifting in and out rather than sitting with his eyes open, tracking the door. "Has anyone adjusted your IV since they moved you up here?" she asked. Something in her tone made him go still. "Technician came by about an hour ago. Said it was a routine check. Not the nurse assigned to you?" She was down the hall. This was someone different. What did he look like? Reeves described a man she didn't recognize from the description: medium height, dark hair, hospital-issue scrubs, without a department designation visible. Generic in the way that people could be generic when they intended to be. She moved to the IV line and checked it with hands that did not shake. Primary bag was saline, undisturbed, labeled correctly. She followed the line, checked the secondary port, and there she found it a small addition to the injection port cap, a microfilter that should not have been there, and attached to it a secondary reservoir the size of a large pen cartridge, mostly empty, that had been running a slow supplemental drip into the primary line. She disconnected it carefully, holding it away from her skin. Someone added a secondary drip to your line," she said. He stared at it. "What is it?" "I don't know yet. But your primary line is clean. The nurse's station has a portable analyzer. I need 2 minutes." She went to the nursing station. Dr. Sue was at the far end of the corridor on a patient call, and the station was momentarily unmanned, which was the 4th time in this particular shift that the universe had cooperated in ways that Sarah refused to read as anything other than good operational timing, because believing in anything else was a habit she'd deliberately broken a long time ago. She used the portable analyzer on the reservoir contents and had a reading in 90 seconds. Potassium chloride. Concentration calibrated to achieve cardiac effect in a patient with Reeves's documented post-surgical blood pressure range over a period of approximately 40 minutes. If she had not checked the intake record, if she had not noticed the timestamp, if she had been suspended and gone home and stayed there. She was back in Reeves's room in the time it took to think that through. "It was potassium chloride," she said. "Enough to stop your heart in stages." He absorbed this. His expression didn't break apart, it compressed, the way the face of someone trained to receive bad information compresses, folding it inward and continuing. Driscoll. Or someone Driscoll has access to. She was already moving to the room's wall panel, disconnecting the call system override that would have delayed any alarm. "I need to get Sue in here, and I need to do it without explaining everything that I just did to find this." "How are you going to manage that?" "Watch." She pressed the patient call button and then reached over and subtly shifted the IV stand so that the primary line kinked near the drip chamber, not enough to compromise the drip meaningfully, but, enough to trigger the bedside monitor's flow alert. The alarm sounded 17 seconds later, and the sound of footsteps in the hallway was immediate. Dr. Sue came through the door with a nurse behind her, saw the flow alarm, moved to the IV stand, and then Sarah held up the disconnected reservoir. "I need you to have this analyzed," Sarah said. "I found it on the secondary injection port." Sue stared at Sarah. "You're the nurse who's on administrative." "I know who I am." Sarah kept her voice level. "I need you to have this analyzed. Your patient's life depends on the next 3 minutes." Sue was a practical woman. Whatever questions she had, and Sarah could see, there were several stacking up behind her eyes. She set them aside, took the reservoir, and turned to the nurse. "Get pharmacy on the phone, priority flag. Tell them I need a content analysis immediately." She looked back at Sarah. You stay here until I come back." "I wasn't planning on leaving." Sue left. Reeves looked at Sarah from the bed. "That was—" "Don't," she said. She was watching the door. Her hands had been steady through all of it, and they were steady now. But there was a tightness in her chest that had nothing to do with clinical urgency, and everything to do with the understanding that this had escalated past the point where careful invisibility was going to protect anyone. Someone had tried to kill him in a hospital room. That required access, required knowledge. It required a person or persons who had been inside this building, at this floor, in the last few hours, and who had reason to believe that the information Reeves was carrying needed to be permanently silenced before it surfaced. Which meant they were still here, or they had people who were still here, and they would know within a narrow window that the attempt had failed. Her phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number, different from the one Reeves had called from. Virginia area code, not local. The message was 4 words. "Leave the building now." She showed it to Reeves. He read it, and his expression changed into something she hadn't seen from him before, something close to alarm, which on Damon Reeves's was its own kind of data point. "That's the number of the person who authorized my transfer," he said. She looked at the message again. Then she looked at the door. In the corridor outside, she could hear Dr. Sue's voice on the phone with pharmacy, measured and urgent. She could hear Petrie's footsteps making the next hallway circuit. She could hear the building's ordinary sounds, the cartwheels, the distant elevator, the specific white noise of a hospital running its nighttime operations. And underneath all of that, she heard something that was not ordinary. Not a sound, exactly. An absence of one. The elevator at the far end of the 4th-floor corridor, which had been cycling regularly all evening, had stopped, crossed to the window, and adjusted the blinds by 2 inches. In the parking structure, across the way, 3 floors down, a dark SUV with no visible license plate had been parked in the fire lane in front of the exit for the past 11 minutes, engine running, pack, no one getting in or out. She let the blinds close. The text said, "Leave the building." She thought about Sarah Novak, about the 14 months of careful construction, the ordinary pace, the deliberate smallness, all of it designed to hold weight. She thought about Dina Rourke telling her she had good instincts. She thought about Voss's face when she didn't show the fear he was expecting. She thought about Damon Reeves on a gurney in a room in a hospital where someone had gotten close enough to rig his IV line, and about the fact that the person who'd done it had walked through a floor with restricted access and a security guard and managed it anyway, which meant either they had credentials or they had something more useful than credentials. Put the phone in her pocket, turned to Reeves. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Okay. The transfer authorization. You said it was someone I'd recognize the name of, if you told me. Person who just texted." He held her gaze. "Yeah." "Give me the name," he told her. Stood there for 3 seconds, in which the room rearranged itself around the name, not literally, but in the way that information rearranges the space around it when it changes what you understand about a situation, about the size of it, about who was involved, and at what level. The name was not a field operative. It was not a coordinator or a mid-level administration official. It was someone who had testified before a Senate committee 14 months ago. Someone whose face appeared in press briefings. Someone whose signature on a document didn't mean a covert transfer, it meant an authorized federal action. Someone who should not, in any world Sarah could rationally construct, have known she existed. How long have they known where I was? She asked. I don't know. 6 months, maybe more. His voice was careful. They didn't use it until now. Because now they needed leverage. Because now Driscoll is here, and Driscoll is looking for the data and the data names, people who can't afford to be named. He met her eyes. And you're the one person who can move in this hospital without raising flags. You're the one person who knows both worlds. She stood very still. The elevator at the end of the corridor started moving again. She heard the mechanism through the wall, the low mechanical hum of the cable. Going up. It stopped at 4. She heard the doors open. She heard footsteps, not 1 set, 2, maybe 3, and they were not moving with the cadence of hospital staff. She knew how hospital staff walked at night. Measured, purposeful, with the specific rhythm of people who were tired and doing important things and managing both. These footsteps had a different quality. They had the quality of people who were scanning. Reeves had heard it too. His jaw was set. There's a fire exit at the end of the corridor, past the nursing station, Sarah said quietly. If Sue comes back before this room becomes a problem, tell her to take the north stairwell down to radiology and call the main security desk from a landline. Not her cell. And you? She was already at the door, hand on the frame, listening. I'm going to make sure they're looking at me instead of this room. Sarah, if they're what I think they are, then they're going to want information before they do anything decisive. She looked back at him. Which gives me time. She pulled the door open before he could say anything else and stepped into the corridor. There were 2 of them, not 3. She'd miscounted the footsteps, which was an error she noted and set aside. Both in civilian clothes, no visible credentials, the specific build and bearing of people who spent time in conditions that required it. The nearer one was already turning toward her when she stepped out, and she saw his eyes do the rapid assessment that her eyes were simultaneously doing of him. She beat him to the expression by half a second confusion, then recognition, the face of a nurse who had just stepped out of a patient room and was mildly surprised to see new people on a restricted floor. Can I help you? She let her voice carry the slight edge of someone enforcing a protocol. This is a restricted access floor. Do you have a visitor authorization? The nearer one looked at her ID badge, said her name, not Novak. The name underneath. The name she had buried 3 years ago. And everything that Sarah Novak had carefully maintained for 14 months cracked straight down the middle. She didn't flinch. That was the first thing she processed the name they'd used, and she did not flinch, because flinching was information, and she had no intention of giving these 2 men anything they hadn't already taken. The nearer one was mid-40s, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of stillness that came from training rather than temperament. The one behind him was younger, positioned to cover the corridor in both directions, which told her they'd done a sweep before approaching. Competent, not rushed. That was worse than rushed. I don't know what name you're using, she said. That's not a denial. The nearer one had a flat, mid-Atlantic accent and eyes that moved constantly without looking nervous. We're not here to cause problems for you. We just need to talk. You're on a restricted floor without authorization. That's already a problem. We have authorization. He reached into his jacket slowly, deliberately telegraphing the motion, and produced a credential wallet. Federal, not military. An agency she recognized by the seal, but whose personnel she had not previously encountered at this level. She looked at it, looked at him. That authorizes you to be on this floor? It authorizes us to speak with you. I'm on administrative leave. You can schedule something through HR. He caught himself, used the name on her badge. Novak. We're not trying to make this complicated. You used a name that isn't on my badge. You're on a restricted floor outside, visiting hours without a visitor log entry. You have credentials I can't verify from here. She kept her voice at the precise register of professional irritation, not fear. This is already complicated. The younger one shifted his weight. Minimal, controlled, but she caught it. He was getting impatient, which meant the nearer one was the one she needed to keep talking. We know what you found in the room, the nearer one said. I found a flow alarm on an IV line. We know what you analyzed at the nursing station. She absorbed this. They'd been watching the floor. Either live surveillance or someone on staff had flagged her movements, which meant the network inside this building was deeper than she'd initially assessed. She recalibrated and continued. Then you know I've already reported it to the attending physician, she said. Which means whatever you're trying to manage is already in motion. We can still manage it, he said. If you come with us now, I'm not going anywhere with you. I'm also going to need you to step back about 4 feet because you're violating patient floor protocols by standing in a patient room doorway, she said it calmly. If you don't step back, I'm going to call security. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped back. It was a small thing, but it meant something. It meant I'll bring instructions that included some limit on direct action, which told her she had a margin she hadn't been certain existed 30 seconds ago. She did not let that show. I'll hear what you have to say, she said. Not here. There's a family consultation room at the end of this corridor. We go there, door open, and you have 5 minutes. 2 men exchanged a look. The nearer one nodded. She walked ahead of them, which she did not love tactically, but which was better than letting them position behind her without the appearance of leading. And she measured the corridor as she moved 22 feet to the consultation room. Fire exit 8 feet past it, nursing station around the corner, where she could hear Sue's voice still on the phone. She noted a crash cart against the wall near the ice machine and noted it and moved on. Consultation room had a round table, 4 chairs, and a window that looked onto the hospital's interior courtyard. She left the door open as stated, took the chair with the wall at her back, and waited. The nearer one sat. The younger one stayed near the door, which she'd expected. My name is Farrell, the nearer one said. She didn't offer anything in return. The situation with Reeves is more complicated than you understand, Farrell said. Note, the data he's referencing the partition from the backup drive, it exists. That part is true, but what it contains is not what he was told it contains. What does it contain? A partial operational record from a program that is currently ongoing. People who are named in that record are not the villains of this story. Some of them are protected assets. And the people who gave Reeves bad coordinates and got 3 men killed? Farrell's expression didn't change. That's a separate conversation. It isn't. Those are the same people. A short silence. He hadn't expected her to know that, which meant Reeves had told her more than Farrell had anticipated, which meant Farrell's intelligence on what Reeves had said in the last 4 hours was not complete. Filed that. The attempt on his life tonight, she started, was not sanctioned by us. But you knew about the reservoir on his IV line. We knew someone had made an attempt. We didn't sanction it. His voice carried the particular flatness of someone telling the truth about one specific thing in the middle of a much larger framework of selective disclosure. We're trying to stabilize this situation before it becomes uncontrollable. Someone just tried to kill a man in a hospital bed. It's already uncontrollable. It gets significantly more uncontrollable, Farrell said. If the information on that drive reaches people who will misuse it, define misuse, release it without context, without the ability to protect the ongoing operation or the people inside it. He leaned forward slightly. We know you were part of the unit. We know your history with Reeves. We know you understand that some information requires management. She looked at him. What we're asking, he said, is that you help us manage it. The courtyard below the window was empty. A light rain had started at some point. She could see the pavement darkening, the scattered drops on the glass. Farrell was watching her with the patient expression of someone who believed they were offering something reasonable. She thought about the timestamp on the pharmacy record. 14 minutes before the order existed. Whoever had rigged Reeves's IV had done it carefully and had done it with access. Farrell said it wasn't sanctioned. She believed him about the sanctioning and not about the knowledge. If you knew an attempt had been made, she said, and you came here after the attempt instead of before it, then you didn't come here to stop it. You came here to assess whether it had worked. Farrell said nothing. And now that you know it didn't, you're trying a different approach. She kept her voice level. I'm not going to help you manage anything. He held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he sat back. You should think carefully, he said, about your position, about what happens to the life you've built here if certain information becomes available to the hospital administration, to the state nursing board. My credentials are valid. Your credentials are issued under a name that is not legally yours. That's a different conversation than credential validity. He said it without heat, which made it more effective than if he'd leaned on it. I'm not threatening you. I'm describing a landscape. She stood up. I know the landscape, she said. Get off this floor. Novik, you have about 90 seconds before doctor. Sue comes back to that patient room and finds it empty, at which point she calls the floor administrator, which triggers a security response, and then we're all having a much more public conversation. She moved toward the door. I'd suggest the elevator. Farrell looked at her for a long, flat moment. The younger man near the door watched her with the focused attention of someone waiting for a signal that didn't come. Then Farrell stood, straightened his jacket, and walked out. He did not watch them go. She turned back toward Reeves's room. Sue was in the doorway when Sarah got there, the portable analyzer in her hand, and her expression was the expression of someone whose evening had just fundamentally changed character. Potassium chloride, Sue said. The concentrations. I know. This is a police matter. She stopped. Calibrated. Who are you? I'm a nurse on administrative leave who happened to check the intake records and found a timestamp inconsistency. Sarah kept her voice factual. Police should be called. The hospital administrator should be called. Whoever was on this floor in the last 2 hours without a visitor log entry should be flagged to security immediately. You found this. The analyzer is in your hands. Sue looked at the device, then at Sarah, then at Reeves, who was watching from the bed with the stillness of someone managing pain and adrenaline simultaneously. I need to understand what's happening on my floor, Sue said. So do I, Sarah said. I'll explain what I can while you make the calls. Some made the calls. Sarah stood in the corridor and thought about Farrell's 96 estimate and wondered how precisely he'd calculated it and whether that precision meant he had eyes on this floor that hadn't left when he did. Port Calder Police Department sent 2 officers at 7:43. The hospital administrator, a man named Gareth Paulson, who wore the expression of someone whose blood pressure was always approximately 15 points too high, arrived at 7:51 and immediately tried to make the situation smaller than it was, which was the administrative reflex that Sarah had observed consistently in institutions under stress. Let's not use the word assassination, Paulson said in the corridor outside Reeves's room. The word describes what was attempted, Sarah said. It's inflammatory, it's accurate. Sue cut in, which Sarah had not expected and appreciated. Police officers were doing what police officers did in situations that had already exceeded their immediate framework, taking careful notes and waiting for someone with more jurisdiction to arrive. One of them, a sergeant named Briley, had pulled Sarah aside early and taken her through the sequence of events with the methodical attention of someone building a timeline, and she had told him everything that was clinically and observationally accurate, and omitted Farrell and the consultation room because that particular piece of the situation required a jurisdiction she didn't yet have access to. She was managing it. She was aware that she was managing it. She was not comfortable with the management, but she could see no alternative that didn't expose Reeves to a category of risk that 2 police officers and a hospital administrator couldn't address. At 8:17, a man she didn't recognize came off the elevator. He was in his early 60s, gray at the temples, in civilian clothes that fit the way civilian clothes fit when they were chosen to be unremarkable and succeeded. He carried a credential wallet he didn't open immediately, and he moved through the corridor with the specific economy of someone who had been in many versions of this situation and found none of them surprising. He found Sarah first. "Captain Hayes," he said, not quietly, not loudly, just the way you say something that you've been waiting to say in the right room. Briley looked up from his notes. Paulson turned. Sue's head came around. The name landed in the corridor and did not dissipate. Stayed there, in the air, between all of them. Sarah felt it hit her the way. The first cold of a really bad winter hits not unexpected, but still, when it comes, sharper than you'd prepared for. She looked at the man. "You have me at a disadvantage." Colonel Warren Tate, Inspector General's office. He opened the credential wallet this time. "I've been looking for you for a while. Not in the way that concerns you," he added. "In the way that should have happened a long time ago." She held his gaze, said nothing. "There's a lot we need to talk about," Tate said. "But first, where is Major Driscoll?" Nobody knew where Driscoll was. Tate took this information with the composure of someone who had suspected it and was now confirmed, and he made 2 calls from the corridor that Sarah was not close enough to hear, and that concluded within 4 minutes. Then he came back to her. "Driscoll cleared the Naval Station gate at 1740, he said. "He hasn't returned. His assigned quarters were empty when we checked." A pause. "His personal cell phone last pinged a tower 3 miles from this hospital at 1920. Been off since." Sarah did the math. Driscoll had gone dark shortly after she'd found the reservoir. Shortly after whoever had rigged the IV would have realized the attempt had failed. "He ran," she said, "or was moved." Tate's expression was careful. "The 2 are not mutually exclusive, Farrell. I know about Farrell." He said it in a way that meant he knew quite a lot about Farrell. "Did he threaten you directly?" He described a landscape. "What did he want?" "Cooperation. Specifically, he wanted me to help manage the information Reeves is carrying." Tate was quiet for a moment. "And you declined?" "I declined." He nodded, once. Not approval, exactly, more like confirmation of something he'd been operating on as an assumption. The Inspector General's office opened an inquiry into the operation. "Reeves was part of 6 weeks ago. We've been building a record. The attempt tonight." He glanced at the door to Reeves's room. "That's not an isolated action. That's someone cleaning up before the inquiry can reach them. How many people know about the inquiry? Not enough, or it would have moved faster. Too many, or tonight wouldn't have happened." He said it with the tired pragmatism of someone who understood that institutional investigations were always simultaneously too public and too slow. "We need Reeves's testimony, and we need the access authorization on the drive partition." "I don't have the drive. Reeves told us where it is." He met her eyes. "We need someone who can retrieve it without flagging the movement to whoever is still watching." She looked at him. "You've been moving through this hospital for the past 3 hours without triggering an institutional response," he said. "You know the building. You know who's compromised and who isn't." A pause. "I know that's not what I should be asking you to do." "Then don't ask." "I'm not asking. I'm telling you what the situation requires and letting you decide." He said it simply. "That's the best I can offer." She stood in the corridor and listened to the hospital around her, the monitors, the carts, the elevator, and thought about what she'd built in 14 months and what it had cost and what it had been worth. She thought about Dina Rourke telling her she had good instincts. She thought about Voss watching her leave his office and not quite knowing what he was watching. Thought about Reeves in the trauma bay, returned from somewhere nobody should have to go, and about the 3 men who hadn't made it to the extraction point. "Where is it?" she asked. Tate told her. The drive was in the Naval Station's evidence storage facility, not the main building, the secondary annex used for field recovery items from medical transfers. It had been logged under a materiel code that would read to a casual reviewer as standard personal effects from a hospital transport. The annex had security, but it was end-of-shift security at a secondary facility, which meant one guard, one camera on the exterior, a badge reader on the door that logged entries. "I don't have station access," she said. "You have Reeves's authorization code. He gave it to me, and I'm giving it to you." Tate handed her a folded paper. Still active. They haven't revoked it, because revoking it would flag the account. And the account is part of what we're building a record around. She took the paper. "There's a vehicle in the parking structure," Tate said. "Level 2, space 44. Keys are under the visor. It has a gate transponder. You set this up before you got here. I set it up when Reeves's transfer was flagged to my office this afternoon. I had hoped the situation would be different when I arrived." His expression held something complicated. "I'm sorry it isn't." She pocketed the paper. "I need 20 minutes in that building." "What's your window?" 45. "If Farrell's people don't move faster than I'm expecting, and if they do, then we'll know what we need to know about how deep this goes." He said it with a flatness that meant he understood exactly how unsatisfying that answer was. She went to Reeves's room, told him what she needed, received 2 confirmations from him about the storage location and the drive's physical descriptor, and then looked at him for a moment. "Tate," she said, "you trust him?" Reeves considered it genuinely, which she appreciated. Trust that he's running out of options, which makes him more reliable than someone who has plenty. She nodded, started for the door. "Sarah." He said it like the name was an effort. "Third man. Foot." She turned. "Drive has his last field report on it. What he found before he was killed." His voice was careful and even, and she could see what it cost. "It needs to matter, whatever happens." "I know," she said. He left the building, through the radiology corridor entrance, the same route she'd used 3 hours ago, and retrieved the car from level 2 exactly where Tate had said it would be. The gate transponder worked. She was on the road to the Naval Station Annex by 9:03. The Annex was a low concrete building at the southern edge of the station grounds, separated from the main medical facility by a quarter-mile of access road. One exterior lamp, one camera positioned above the door, one guard station visible through the single-pane window. The guard on duty was reading something on a personal tablet, which was a security failure that the guard probably didn't think of as a security failure, because nothing interesting ever happened at the materiel annex. Sarah had taken the long approach to assess the camera angle. It covered the door, but not the east corner of the building, which was where the secondary entrance was, the one that handled oversized materiel and had a separate badge reader on a different logging circuit from the main door. She knew about the secondary entrance because she had 3-year-old memory of a facility layout briefing that she'd listened to without being certain she'd ever need it and had retained anyway because she retained. Everything and the retention was not always convenient. She used Reeves's code at the secondary reader, green light. Inside, the annex was organized in the unglamorous way of functional storage metal shelving, labeled bins, the slightly stale air of a space that was climate-controlled but not circulated often. She moved to the medical transfer section using the materiel code Reeves had given her and found the bin inside 2 minutes. Inside the bin was a sealed evidence envelope. Inside the envelope, logged as personal electronic device, non-military issue, field recovery, was a drive that was smaller than she'd expected, not much larger than a thumbnail, matte black casing, the kind of hardware that was designed to be overlooked. Pocketed it. On the way back to the entrance, she passed a section of the shelving she hadn't cleared. On the way, in the section running the south wall, which was in shadow from the single overhead light. She registered the shadow a half second before she registered what was in it. Driscoll. He was alive. She could see the rise and fall of his chest, but he was on the floor, wrists zip-tied to the bottom shelf rail, a bruise darkening from his left temple down to his jaw. He was conscious. His eyes found her the moment she stopped, crossed to him in 4 steps, crouched, checked his pulse rapid but present, checked the bruising for skull fracture indicators, checked his pupils. "Who did this?" she said quietly. His voice was thick. "2 men. 40 minutes ago," he swallowed. "They said he stopped. Tried again. They were going to come back. After the IV line had finished its work. After Reeves was dead, and there was nothing left to testify about. Can you walk? If you get the ties off." She didn't have a blade. She looked at the shelving, found a section of cut binding wire in the supply bin, 3 feet away, worked the edge of it against the zip ties for longer than she wanted to. Her hands were not shaking, but they were moving fast, and fast was not always as precise as slow, and got the ties cut in 90 seconds. Driscoll was not steady on his feet. She took his left arm over her shoulders and moved him toward the secondary entrance. He was heavy and uncooperative in the way of someone whose coordination was impaired and whose pride was creating friction, but she'd moved injured people before under conditions where pride was not the primary variable, and she managed it. "Driscoll." She kept her voice low. "The men who did this, were they working with Farrell?" Pause. "I don't know who Farrell is. Federal credentials. Mid-40s. Flat effect." "No." He shook his head and winced at the motion. "These were different. It was military. The way they moved. But not yours." "No, not mine." He looked at her sidelong as they moved. "Your haze. The haze from the unit. We can talk about that later. I was trying to find you." His voice was labored with the effort of moving. It wasn't for Farrell. I was trying to warn Reeves. Someone told me there was going to be an attempt, and I couldn't reach the right people fast enough." He exhaled hard. "I got here too late." She thought about that. Thought about the speed of what she'd found the timestamp, the reservoir, the competence of its placement, and thought about whether Driscoll's presence here, zip-tied to a shelf, was the result of him interfering, or of him knowing too much. She decided the answer would resolve itself later, and concentrated on the door. The secondary entrance opened onto the east side of the building, outside the camera's field. She got Driscoll to the car, got him into the passenger seat, and took a breath that she let out deliberately, slowly. The drive was in her pocket. Driscoll was in the car. Reeves was on the 4th floor with Tate and a police presence that was at least partially functional. Pulled out her phone to call Tate. The call connected on the first ring. "I have the drive," she said, "and I have Driscoll. He's injured but stable. He says he was trying to run interference." A beat of silence. "Where are you?" "Annex parking. South side." She started the car. "I'm coming back." "Don't." Tate's voice had changed in a way she clocked immediately faster. "Something's happened at the hospital." She gripped the wheel. 20 minutes ago, someone accessed the 4th floor restricted corridor using a credential that should have been flagged. Got past security. A pause that lasted exactly long enough to mean that what he was about to say was the kind of thing that changed the weight of a situation. "Reeves's room is empty, Sarah. The monitoring equipment is running, but he's gone." She stared. She stared at the windshield. The rain had gotten heavier. Came down on the roof of the car in a sound like white noise, like static, like the space between a signal and its response. "Gone as in ambulatory or gone as in taken?" she asked. "We don't know yet." Tate's voice was tight. "Sue says he was in the bed 12 minutes ago. Stepped out to meet with the police sergeant. When she came back, the IV disconnected cleanly. His personal effects are gone. The bed was empty." Driscoll turned to look at her from the passenger seat, reading her face. She thought about Reeves in the trauma bay that morning, the combat response, the absolute stillness when she'd said the designation, the look in his eyes when he'd actually seen her. She thought about him on the phone saying, "I have about 4 minutes before someone notices." She thought psyched about what he'd said, about Foot's report, and the way he'd said it with the specific weight of someone carrying something on behalf of a person who could no longer carry it themselves. She thought about the two men who'd moved through this building tonight with the competence of people who'd timed the IV drip to the attending's schedule, who'd intercepted Driscoll before he could reach anyone with what he knew. And she thought about what Tate had said, gone as in ambulatory or gone as in taken. Because there was a third option neither of them had named yet. Gone as in he'd moved himself. Because Damon Reeves, injured and medicated and 3 gunshot wounds into a hospital stay, had been a trained operator for 12 years before any of this. And trained operators did not wait in monitored rooms when they understood the geometry of a threat. Put the car in gear. I know where he is, she said. How could you possibly? Because I know how he thinks. She pulled out of the annex parking. And because before I left the room, I told him that if the situation changed, the north stairwell was the exit. She accelerated onto the access road. He's not gone. He's moving. And whoever took the credential to get onto that floor is moving with him or moving after him. And I need to get there before the geometry closes. She didn't hear what Tate said next because at that exact moment, the rear window of the car exploded inward. Driscoll Skell ducked. She kept both hands on the wheel, controlled the swerve, did not brake, accelerated instead, the correct response, the response that the part of her that had not been Sarah Novak for 3 years knew without choosing. The second shot hit the roof and ricocheted off into the dark. Driscoll had his head below the dash line. Drive, he said, which was unnecessary but understandable. She drove. Behind them, headlights appeared on the Access Road 1 vehicle, moving fast, the kind of fast that was not a coincidence. She had the drive in her pocket, Driscoll in the passenger seat, Reeves somewhere in a hospital stairwell, and a car behind her on a naval station access road at 9:23 at night. She thought about Sarah Novak's and everything Sarah Novak had been built to avoid. Then she thought about Foot and about what mattered. She turned off the access road lights and drove into the dark. The access road curved hard, left 200 meters ahead, and she knew it because she'd driven it once in daylight and once was enough. She killed the headlights at the curve, dropped 2 gears, and used the ambient light from the station perimeter fencing to hold her lane not comfortable, not clean, but functional, which was the standard she was working to right now. The vehicle behind her overshot the curve by 40 feet before correcting. 40 feet was not a lot, but it was something. Driscoll had pulled himself back into the seat. His left hand was braced against the dash, and his right was pressed to the window frame, and he was breathing through his nose in the deliberate way of someone who was injured and managing it consciously. He didn't tell her how to drive. She appreciated that. Phone, she said. He passed her his, without asking whose number. Kept her eyes on the dark road and spoke from memory. Tate picked up in 2 rings. Someone's behind us on the access road. 1 vehicle moving fast. They took 2 shots. She kept her voice at operational tempo, no affect, just information. I need the main gate to know we're coming, and I need them to log the vehicle behind us the moment it exits the station. Still on station grounds? For about 90 seconds. Where is Reeves? We found him. Tate's voice shifted in a way she couldn't fully read, not relief. Something more complicated. North stairwell, second landing. He'd made it that far on his own before he went down. Her jaw tightened. How bad? The chest wound is bleeding again. Tore something getting out of bed. A pause. He's conscious. He's asking for you. Get him back to a monitored room. Not the same one. Different floor, different wing, and I want a name-verified roster of everyone who goes near him. She handed the phone back to Driscoll. Tell Tate to have someone at the hospital's south vehicle entrance in 4 minutes. Driscoll relayed it. She hit the main gate at 50 kilometers over the posted limit, and the gate was up. Tate had managed that much, and she was on the public road before the vehicle behind her reached the gate. She watched the mirror. The pursuing vehicle stopped at the gate. The gate stayed down. She let herself breathe. The south vehicle entrance was a loading dock access, used primarily by pharmacy deliveries and linen services. And the man Tate had sent was a naval investigative officer named Kamara, who was young enough that she could see the effort it took him not to visibly react to the state of the car or of Driscoll, who had dried blood on his temple, and the expression of someone who'd had a genuinely terrible evening. Kamara took Driscoll's left arm without being asked. Sarah locked the car and followed them through the service corridor that ran parallel to the hospital's east wing, moving fast, tracking the building around her by the sounds and lights of its functioning, the mechanical room on the left, the linen chute access on the right. The smell of industrial detergent that meant the laundry processing was 2 doors down. "Which floor?" she asked Kamara. 6, northwest wing. Different from the 4th floor in layout and staffing patterns, which was correct. She approved without saying so. Reeves was in a room with 2 people who were not medical staff investigative officers. She assessed from their posture and from the way they were positioned relative to the door. A nurse she didn't recognize was adjusting the IV line, and Sue was there, standing at the foot of the bed with her arms crossed, and the expression of someone who had decided that this night was going to require a complete reset of her professional framework, and was working on accepting that. Reeves looked like what he was, a man who had walked out of a hospital bed on 3 gunshot wounds and a post-surgical chest repair, and made it down 2 flights of stairs on will and stubbornness, and had paid for it. His color was poor. The monitor showed pressure that was lower than it needed to be, and there was a fresh bandage on his left side that was already showing through at the edge. His eyes found her the moment she came through the door. "You got it," he said. Not a question. She held up the drive. Something moved across his face, not relief, not satisfaction. Something quieter than both. "Footlogged everything," he said. "Every contact, every coordination. The names go up to..." "I know." She cut him off gently because the 2 investigative officers were listening, and she wanted Tate in the room before Reeves said anything that would require a formal chain of custody. "Going to Tate. He's here. He's real." I assessed him. Reeves held her gaze for a moment. Then he lay back. Sue stepped to Sarah's side. Quietly, "He needs to not have walked down 2 flights of stairs tonight." "I know. He also needs to not have been nearly poisoned tonight." So she stopped. "I don't know what's happening in my hospital. I'll explain what I can." "You'll explain everything," Sue said, with the absolute firmness of a physician who had reached the edge of her tolerance for partial information. "When this is done, you will sit down and explain everything." "Yes," Sarah said, and she meant it. Tate arrived on the 6th floor at 10:09, and Sarah handed him the drive in the corridor outside Reeves's room with Kamara as a witness and asked him to confirm receipt on a written log, which he did without making her ask twice. He examined the drive, confirmed the descriptor against the information Reeves had provided, and made a call that she did not try to hear. When he came back, his expression had the particular quality of a situation that was moving finally, genuinely moving in the direction it needed to go. "The inquiry team is 30 minutes out," he said. "We'll need Reeves's formal statement as soon as he's medically cleared to give it." He looked at her. "And yours. Mine. You're a material witness to an attempted homicide, an armed pursuit on a federal installation, and an unauthorized access event in a restricted facility." He held her gaze. "I also need your account of the operation 3 years ago. The classified mission. All of it." She had known this was coming. She had known it since the moment in the trauma bay when she'd said the designation and watched Reeves go still. She had known it the way you know things that are inevitable, not with shock, but with the particular weariness of having outrun something for a long time and now watching it arrive. "Okay," she said, "I also need to tell you something." He said it with a directness that made her pay attention. "The IG's inquiry Found your service record 8 weeks ago. Classified file from the Afghanistan mission. What you did, what the unit reported, the reason the mission was classified at the level it was." He paused. Classification was not to protect operational security. It was to protect the people who made the decision that sent your unit into a compromised site. He held her eyes. The same people who are connected to what happened to Reeves's team. Stood with that. "You weren't erased because you were a security risk," Tate said. "You were erased because you were a witness." The corridor was quiet. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor alarmed briefly and was silenced. She could hear the rain still on the exterior windows. It had been raining for hours now, and Detson showed no interest in stopping. "Who authorized the classification?" she asked. Tate said a name. It was the same name Reeves had told her in the hospital room, the name that had rearranged her understanding of the situation's size. Hearing it from Tate's mouth, in this corridor, with the drive in Tate's possession, and the inquiry team 30 minutes away, it landed differently than it had the first time. The first time it had been the weight of a problem. Now it was the weight of an answer. The inquiry team arrived at 10:44, 4 people, 2 in uniform and 2 in civilian dress, carrying equipment cases and the particular energy of people who had been waiting for a movement in a long-stalled situation and were now moving fast to compensate. Tate briefed them in the corridor while Sarah sat in the family room on the 6th floor and wrote out her account on paper, Tate's request. Paper, not digital, which told her something about how carefully he was managing the information chain. She wrote for 40 minutes. She was thorough. She did not omit the consultation room, conversation with Farrell, or the annex, or the shots fired on the access road, or what Driscoll had told her about trying to warn Reeves. She wrote with the factual compression of someone trained to report under conditions where brevity mattered and accuracy mattered more. When she finished, her hand ached, and she sat for a moment looking at the pages. 3 years. 14 months as Sarah Novak, and 3 years before that, as something harder to name, not quite hiding, not quite waiting, something in between that she had told herself was a choice, and that she understood now had always been partly a wound. She brought the pages to Tate. He read through them at a pace that told her he was actually reading, not skimming. When he finished, he set them down. The shots on the access road, the vehicle was logged by the gate camera. We have plates. Whose? Registered to a vehicle pool connected to a private security contractor. Contractor has a service agreement with a defense coordination office that the inquiry has been looking at for 4 months. He said it steadily. It fits. Farrell. Farrell and the people above Farrell. He picked up the pages. This is enough. With the drive and Reeves's testimony, and what Driscoll is giving us right now, this is enough to move. She absorbed the word enough. It was a strange word for a situation this large, but she understood what he meant. What happened over the next 6 hours was not dramatic in the way that things were dramatic in the moment of their crisis. It was the drama of documentation, of formal statements, of the inquiry team working through the chain of evidence with the methodical care of people who understood that the thing they were building needed to hold weight in rooms far from this hospital. Reeves gave his statement at 2 a.m, propped at 45 degrees with Sue monitoring his pressure every 15 minutes and making clear she would end the session if the numbers moved in the wrong direction. He spoke for 90 minutes, without gaps, without hedging, with the pacific clarity of someone who had been carrying information for a long time and was now setting it down. Driscoll gave his in a separate room. Sarah did not hear it, but Camara told her. Later, it corroborated the timeline she'd written down to the minute. At 3:47 in the morning, Tate's phone rang. He stepped away. When he came back, his expression had changed, not dramatically, but perceptibly, in the way that faces change when something has been decided at a level above the room you're standing in. Farrell is in federal custody, he said. Picked up at a private airfield 40 minutes ago. He was booked on a chartered flight. He let that settle. 2 others were detained at the same location. She nodded. Contractor vehicles are being seized. The service agreement is being frozen. And the name we've both been carrying tonight, he stopped. Chose his words. The person who authorized the original classification and signed the coordination directive for the operation that killed Foote and Rawlings and Martinez. He paused. An arrest warrant was signed 20 minutes ago. Family room was very quiet. Sarah had imagined this moment in various forms over 3 years, not obsessively, not constantly, but in the specific way that you imagine the resolution of something unfinished when you can't sleep and the night is long. She had imagined satisfaction. She had imagined something like relief. She had imagined, on the worst nights, just the fact of it, the simple fact of the record being corrected. What she actually felt was closer to exhaustion. Not the bad kind, the kind that comes after something is done, when the body finally believes it. Okay, she said. Tate looked at her. That's twice tonight you've said okay to things that warrant more. What would you prefer? He considered it. I don't know. Maybe nothing more is right. She thought he might be correct. Dawn came gray and damp through the 6th-floor windows, the rain finally thinning to something that couldn't decide if it was mist or just the memory of rain. Sarah was in the corridor outside Reeves's room when Sue found her, and the doctor had the look of someone who had been awake all night and was now on the other side of it, past tired into a kind of stripped-down clarity. His pressure is stable, Sue said. The chest wound is going to need attention in the next 48 hours, but we're not looking at a second surgery if he rests. She paused. Whether Damon Reeves rests is a question I'm less confident about. He will, Sarah said. You know this how? Because he's already done the hard part. She looked at the door. Everything from here is easier. Sue was quiet for a moment. Then Dr. Voss called. The administrator notified him about last night. I figured. He wants a meeting. The administrative leave review. She said it carefully. Given what's now documented what you found, what you prevented Paulson is already reframing his position on the situation. I expect Voss will do the same. She looked at Sarah with something direct and undecorated. I want to say for what it's worth, that what you did last night was… Don't, Sarah said, not unkindly. Sue stopped. Not yet. Sarah looked at the window at the gray morning. I know what you mean, but I don't want it yet. Sue nodded slowly. Okay, when you're ready. She left Sarah in the corridor. Sarah stood there for a while. She was aware of the drive, now in Tate's possession, and being processed by people with the authority to act on its contents. She was aware of the formal record that now contained her name, her real name attached to events that would be reviewed, documented, entered into a chain of accountability that she had spent 3 years outside of. She was aware of the inquiry, the arrests, the warrant, the slow grind of institutional consequence beginning its work. And she was aware of the smaller things. The woman in the waiting room with the anticoagulant bracelet. The granola bar she'd eaten yesterday afternoon without tasting it. The badge on her chest that still read Sarah Novak because no one had asked for it back. She went into Reeves's room. He was awake. Barely. His eyes had the half-focused quality of someone oscillating between sleep and consciousness, but when she came in, he found her face and stayed there. Farrell's in custody, she said. It's moving. He exhaled slowly. Foote's report, it'll be in the record. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, some of the tension that had been in his face since the trauma bay, since before that, probably. Since whatever moment in whatever operation had made this inevitable, had settled into something that was not quite peace, but was adjacent to it. What happens to you now, he asked. I don't know yet. Your Tate says it'll be addressed. I'm not certain what that means in practice. It means they give you back what they took. He said it with the flat conviction of someone who had decided this and was not interested in alternatives. She looked at him. Maybe. Or it means there are hearings and reviews, And it takes 18 months, and the outcome is uncertain. She said it without bitterness. Which would also be fine. Sarah, I'm serious. Fine is enough. She sat down in the chair by the bed, the same angle she'd used before. Wall at her back, room in her peripheral field. Some things were just where you put yourself. Fine is a long way from where this was 12 hours ago. He was quiet for a moment. I should have found you sooner. You were busy getting shot before that. She looked at him. You thought I was dead. I worked to make you think that. I know, he said it simply. Still, she didn't have an answer for that, or she had one that wasn't ready to be said. So she's let it sit in the room between them, in the way that things sat between people who had a history complicated enough to require more than one conversation to resolve. Outside, Port Calder was beginning its morning in the way that cities began their mornings regardless of what had happened in one building during the night traffic, the distant sounds of the naval station, particular quality of light that came after a long rain. She was still sitting there when Tate knocked on the open door at 6:51. We have a development, he said. His voice had the careful neutrality of someone managing news he wasn't sure how to categorize. The formal arrest this morning, the warrant that was signed. He looked between her and Reeves. There's been a complication. She turned to look at him fully. Target was taken into custody at their residence at 05:30. Processing was initiated. He stopped. During processing, a document was presented by the target's legal counsel. Preemptive immunity agreement. He held her gaze. Signed 11 months ago, by the same office that authorized the original classification. The room was very still. The immunity agreement covers all actions related to the Operational Coordination Directive, Tate said, which is the document that authorized the bad coordinates, Sarah said. Yes. And the classification that erased my record. Yes. She sat with that. Beside her, she heard Reeves's monitor maintaining its steady rhythm, indifferent to the fact that the thing they had spent the night building had just revealed a floor beneath it. Who signed the immunity agreement? She asked. Tate said the name. It was not the same name as before. It was a different name. A name that sat at a different level, not the person who had made the operational decisions, but the person who had made the decision to protect the person who made the operational decisions. Higher, older, more insulated. The inquiry can still proceed, Tate said. The immunity agreement limits what charges can be brought, but it doesn't cover everyone connected to it. Farrell isn't covered. The contractor isn't covered. The people who attempted Reeves's life aren't covered. He paused. But the primary architect walks, Reeves said. His voice was flat and without the energy to be either surprised or angry, which was the voice of someone absorbing something they had suspected was possible. Not entirely. Tate's jaw was tight. The immunity agreement has conditions. Cooperation. Full disclosure of the operational record. Hearings will be public. He looked at Sarah. Everything that was done to you will be part of that public record. Your service, your classification, the deliberate erasure of your identity. It will be documented, and it will be disclosed. But no criminal consequence for the person who ordered it, she said. Not under current law, not with that agreement in place. He said it without flinching. I'm sorry. This part of it is not what it should be. She sat quietly for a long moment. 14 months as Sarah Novak. 3 years before that, the careful construction, small apartment, the secondhand furniture. Voss's voice as saying, maybe you should find a job where mistakes don't cost lives. She heard it differently now, from this distance, with this particular morning light coming through a 6th floor window. The public record, she said. Yes. Foot's report. Rawlings and Martinez. The operation. The names, all of it. Open. On the record. Tate held her eyes. It won't fix everything. No, she said. But it's something that can't be taken back. He nodded. She looked at the window for a moment. At the city, doing its ordinary morning. The gray sky beginning, very slowly, to lighten at the eastern edge. Then she looked back at Tate. There's one more thing, she said. The immunity agreement, it was signed 11 months ago. I've been in this hospital for 14 months. She kept her voice even. Someone knew I was here before the agreement was signed. Before Reeves's transfer. Before any of this. She paused. They knew, and they waited. They used the agreement as a safety net, and then they moved Reeves here to flush me out. Tate's expression changed by a fraction, recalculating. The immunity agreement has conditions, she said. Full disclosure of the operational record. Cooperation. She met his eyes. What happens to the agreement if it can be demonstrated that the person who signed it was aware of an ongoing obstruction of a federal inquiry at the time they signed it? Tate was very still, because if someone can demonstrate that the immunity agreement itself was executed in bad faith. She stopped. Let him finish the sentence. It voids, he said quietly. Under federal statute, a preemptive immunity agreement executed while the signatory had knowledge of active, ongoing criminal conduct related to the covered actions. He stopped. Voids. The room was quiet. I need to know, Sarah said, who in the IG's office has access to the record of when I was identified, when my location was confirmed, and whether that timeline overlaps with the 11 months since the agreement was signed. Tate reached for his phone. Then he stopped, looked at her. That information is going to be in a file that is currently sealed pending the inquiry's primary proceedings. He said it carefully. File is accessible to senior inquiry personnel only. He paused. And to one other person. She waited. The immunity agreement requires the target to provide full access to all operational files as a condition of the agreement, which means the target's own legal team has the complete operational record, including all surveillance and identification activity from the past 14 months as part of their compliance documentation. He was looking at her with an expression she recognized as the specific look of someone watching a conclusion arrive. It's already in the record, she said. If they identified you before the agreement and withheld that from the inquiry as part of executing the agreement, then the agreement is built on a false foundation. Yes, his jaw was tight, and the compliance documentation they submitted, if it contains what I think it contains. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. His expression shifted into something she'd learned over the course of this night to read as significant. He answered, listened for 11 seconds, said nothing except understood and ended the call. When he looked up, the expression on his face was one she had not yet seen from him. The compliance documentation was reviewed an hour ago by the inquiry's legal team, he said. It contains a surveillance record, location confirmation, date stamped. He paused. The date is 13 months ago. 2 months before the immunity agreement was signed. The morning light was coming through the window now with more conviction. The rain was gone. In the corridor outside, the hospital was shifting into its daytime operations, the sounds changing, the pace increasing, the specific energy of a new shift beginning its work. The agreement voids, Sarah said. The agreement voids, Tate said. Reeves was looking at the ceiling. His expression was not triumph. She would have worried if it had been. It was something quieter and more durable than that. The expression of someone watching a wrong thing. Finally, slowly, begin to come undone. Sarah sat in her chair, wall at her back. Room in her peripheral field. She thought about what came next. The hearings. The public record. Her name, her real name attached to a true account of what had been done and what she had been and what she had continued to be throughout the 14 months of careful, deliberate, exhausted ordinary. And then she thought about something else, something smaller, which was sometimes where the real things lived. She thought about Dr. Sue saying, I want to say, for what it's worth. She thought about Dean O'Rourke. You have good instincts, and if you don't trust them, nobody else will. She thought about Petrie at his station, saying evening, Ms. Novak, with the comfortable recognitions of someone who expected to see her again tomorrow. There was a meeting with Voss she would have to attend. There would be a conversation she would have to have, and it would be uncomfortable because Voss was a man who needed his framework to be correct, and his framework was going to require significant revision. She did not know if she wanted to have that conversation as Sarah Novak, or as someone whose name she hadn't used in 3 years, and she thought that was probably a decision she could allow herself to make slowly. The window was bright now. The city was fully awake. Tate stepped out to make more calls. Camara appeared at the door, looked at Sarah, and said, "Doctor, Voss is downstairs. He's asking to speak with you." She looked at Reeves. He looked back at her, said nothing, which was correct. She stood, adjusted her badge, Sarah Novak, RN, Coastal Mercy Medical Center, the small laminated rectangle that had been both armor and cage for 14 months. "Tell him I'll be down in 5 minutes," she said. Camara left. She stood at the window for a moment, looking at Port Calder in the full morning light, and she thought, this is not over. The hearings were ahead. The public record was ahead. The question of what she did next, this hospital, this city, this name, this version of herself that had grown into something she hadn't predicted when she built it, all of that was ahead and uncertain. The thing that had been hunting her for 3 years had a face now, and the face was in a room where it would be made to answer, and the record that had been falsified to protect it was coming apart at its engineered seams. That was not everything, but it was the thing that made everything else possible. Turned from the window and walked to the elevator. The elevator took her to the ground floor, and the doors opened onto the main lobby, and Voss was there, not in his office, not in a controlled space of his own choosing, but in the open lobby, with the morning light coming through the entrance glass, and the first shift staff moving around him, which meant someone had told him to wait here, and he had, which was already different from the man who stood behind his desk and did not offer chairs. He looked tired. That was the first thing she noticed, not the composure he usually wore, like a second set of scripts, but the specific tired of someone who had been awake all night, processing a revision to something they'd believed was settled. He was in civilian clothes, which meant he'd come in off hours, which meant the call from Paulson had pulled him out of bed. She walked toward him at the pace of someone who had somewhere to be. Novak. He caught himself. There's apparently a question about what name to use. "Sarah's fine," she said. "For now." He absorbed this. "Can we?" He gestured toward the side corridor, away from the lobby traffic. She followed him to the alcove near the administrative wing, the same general territory where he told her she was on leave yesterday afternoon, which felt like a different week. He didn't have a speech prepared. She could see the absence of the structured authority he usually carried, the way he was working from something less organized than his normal mode. She thought that was probably more honest than anything rehearsed would have been. "I was told what happened last night," he said. "The full account. Tate walked me through it an hour ago." He paused. "I'm trying to find the right. I don't have a framework for this." "You don't need one right now. I put you on administrative leave." He said it. Like the weight of it had only fully registered in the last hour. "Suspended you while you were in the middle of the cess. You made a decision with the information you had." She kept her voice even. "Not absolution, not cruelty, just accuracy. That's what decisions are." He looked at her directly. "I've spent 14 months treating you like a liability." "Yes, and the entire time. The entire time I was a nurse doing my job," she said. "That's the part that matters. Not the other part. Not what you didn't know." She held his gaze. The woman in the waiting room with the anticoagulant bracelet. Elderly patient in Bay 3 who was having a TIA that 2 other people missed. The documentation that cleared your backlog every single shift. She let that sit. Those things happened. They're in the record. The other part, the part you're recalibrating around right now, that doesn't erase what was already there. He was quiet for a moment. "I owe you an apology," he said. "You owe me accurate professional evaluation going forward," she said. The apology is secondary. She wasn't trying to be hard about it. She was trying to be precise, because precision was what she had, instead of the kind of grace that forgave quickly and without examination. I'm not in a position to process much more than that today. He nodded, once, with the deliberate care of someone accepting a term they understood was fair. The administrative leave is rescinded, he said. Effective this morning. Paulson is drafting the formal notice. He paused. There's also going to be a conversation about your role, about what the department can offer someone with your... He stopped. I don't know what the correct word is. Background, she said. Background. He accepted the word. There's going to be a conversation. When you're ready for it. She nodded and left him in the alcove. She had a feeling he stood there for a while, after she walked away, working through the revision. She found she didn't have the energy to imagine what that was like, and didn't particularly try. The formal hearings began 19 days later in a federal building in Washington that had the specific institutional gravity of rooms where things were decided rather than rooms where things were done. Sarasa gave her testimony on the third day of proceedings, in a room with a long table and a panel of 8, with Tate's legal team present and a stenographer and a camera recording for the official transcript. She had been in rooms like this before, in a previous iteration of her life, and the experience of being in them did not change fundamentally just because you were sitting on the testifying side rather than the observational one. Table was still long. The panel still had the faces of people accustomed to hearing difficult things and processing them from behind professional composure. The air still had the quality of recycled institutional air that all formal proceedings seem to share, regardless of what city or building they occurred in. Testified for 4 hours. She did not embellish and she did not compress. She gave the panel the Afghanistan mission the way she remembered it, not the classified summary version, not the sanitized after-action version that had apparently been filed in her place, but the operational reality of what she had observed and what had been done and what decision had produced which consequence. She named the coordinates that had been wrong. She described the timeline in which the wrong coordinates had been communicated and the window in which a correction could have been made and wasn't. She talked about Martinez getting Reeves to the extraction point and not making it to the aircraft. She talked about what she'd found in the forward medical facility immediately after the mission, the things that had told her the operation had not been an intelligence of failure, but a deliberate one, and why that understanding had made her understand that she needed to disappear. She talked about Port Calder, about 14 months, about what she'd built and what it had cost, and what she'd learned during it that she hadn't expected to learn. The panel chair, a senior official named Haverford, who had the face of someone who had heard difficult things for 30 years and had not stopped being affected by them, which Sarah took as a good sign, asked her one question she hadn't prepared for. During the 14 months, Haverford said, when you were functioning under a different identity, in circumstances that were by any measure significantly below your demonstrated capability, what kept you there? She thought about it. The panel waited. The patience, she said. It came out without much deliberation, which meant it was true. Not in a way that sounds as clean as that. I didn't arrive there with a purpose. I arrived there because it was a city I didn't know, and a profession I was trained for, and a cover that made logical sense. She paused. There was a woman in the waiting room in my second week. 91 years old. Came in alone. Nobody called ahead for her. Nobody came with her. She had pneumonia and mild sepsis, and she was completely calm about it, the way very old people sometimes are, and she'd been in the waiting room for 3 hours before I got to her. She stopped. I got her admitted and stabilized, and I sat with her for 20 minutes while we waited for her room assignment. She held my hand. She looked at the table. I don't know if that answers your question. That was the moment I stopped thinking of it as temporary. Haverford wrote something down. The hearing continued. The immunity agreement voided publicly on the 11th day of proceedings. It did not happen dramatically. It happened in a written ruling issued by a federal judge that was published in the legal record, and then picked up by the press within an hour, at which point it became something that existed in the world beyond the confines of the hearing room. The ruling cited the surveillance timeline, the 14-month gap between the identification of Sarah's location and the execution of the immunity agreement, and the deliberate omission of material information during the agreement's negotiation. The arrest followed within 6 hours. Sarah heard about it from Reeves, who called her from a physical therapy session at Coastal Mercy where he had been transferred for recovery. She had arranged that, a fact she hadn't told him, and who delivered the information in the flat tone of someone who had been waiting for it, and was not sure what to feel now that it had arrived. Done, he said. Not done, she said. Started. That's a distinction. It's the correct one. She was in the break room on the 3rd floor, which she had returned to, not as Sarah Novak on administrative leave, but as Sarah Novak on active status, reinstated, operating in an ER that was still the same ERs with the same structural problems and insufficient staffing, and Voss trying to recalibrate his professional relationship with her in real time, which was uncomfortable for both of them, and probably necessary. The trial is still ahead. The secondary charges Farrell, the contractor, the access attempt. It's months. Are you going to testify again? Probably. Pause. Sarah, I know. I don't think you do. He said it carefully. I'm trying to say something, and I'm not doing it efficiently. Then, say it directly. I'm glad you were there. He let the weight of that land without patting it. Night. All of it. But specifically, I'm glad it was you in that trauma bay. She looked at the break room wall. Scheduling board with its color-coded shifts, and the coffee machine that had been broken for 6 weeks, and the cork board with its layers of notices and protocol updates, and one photo someone had pinned of the department's holiday party from 2 years ago that had never been taken down. I was the only person on shift who knew what you needed, she said. Not why. She didn't answer that. There were some things that lived in the category of true and not yet ready, and she'd learned enough about herself to know which conversation she needed time for and which she could have right now, and that this one sat firmly in the first category. Do your physical therapy, she said. Don't argue with the therapist. She's 26 years old, and she weighs 115 pounds, and she makes me feel like I'm failing a class. You are failing a class. Do it anyway. She heard something that might have been a laugh from him, uncomfortable and genuine, and then she hung up and sat for a moment with the coffee machine's broken light glow and the ordinary sounds of the department around her. 3 weeks after the hearing, Tate came to Port Calder. Not officially, or not only officially. He came with 2 things: a formal letter from the Inspector General's office and a conversation he'd requested in advance, which told her it was the conversation that mattered more than the letter. They sat in the hospital cafeteria, which was not a particularly dignified location for what turned out to be a significant exchange. But the cafeteria was where Sarah had a break at 2 in the afternoon, and Tate had driven 4 hours, and she didn't see the point in finding somewhere more formal. The letter came first. She opened it, read it, set it on the table. It contained a formal record correction, the reinstatement of her complete service history under her legal name, the declassification of the Afghanistan mission file at the appropriate level, the documentation of her rank and commendations, and years of service as a combat medic and special operations, support personnel, all of it restored to the official record from which it had been deliberately removed. At the bottom of the letter was a brief formal paragraph noting that the deliberate classification and erasure of her service record had been determined by the IG's inquiry to constitute a wrongful act under federal statute, and that the record correction was issued with the full acknowledgement of that determination. She folded the letter and put it in her jacket pocket. "You're not going to read it again?" Tate asked. "I read it. I know what it says." She picked up her coffee. What did you want to talk about? He looked at her for a moment. There's a position. Not field, I want to be clear about that up front. It's a liaison role between the IG's office and military medical facilities. Identifying systemic vulnerabilities in personnel management, specifically around high-value witnesses and undercover or classified individuals embedded in civilian medical roles. He paused. We've been looking at how easily you were erased and how well the erasure held up, and the conclusion is that the system has significant gaps. People who should be protected aren't. People who should be found aren't found. He held her eyes. You understand both sides of that problem in a way that very few people do. She drank her coffee. You're asking me to leave the ER. I'm asking if you'd consider a role that might use you more fully. I'm already being used fully. She said it without sharpness. I work a full shift. I see 30, 40 patients. I document, I triage, catch the things that other people miss because I was trained to catch things, and I've spent 14 months practicing in an environment that most people with my background would have left inside a month. She set down the cup. It's not wasted. That's exactly what it should be. So I'll consult, she said, for the IG's office. I'll take the calls and review the cases, and I'll tell you what I know about how people disappear and what they need to stay safe while they're doing it. She met his eyes. But I'm not leaving this hospital. Tate studied her. Why? She thought about the honest answer, which was complicated and not entirely linear, and then she decided that Tate had earned an honest answer. Because I came here to disappear, she said. And instead, I became something. And I want to find out what that becomes next without running it through someone else's structure. She paused. I was invisible here for 14 months, and during those 14 months, I was also something. Useful. Real. The work was real. She looked at the cafeteria around them. The staff eating lunch, the family at the corner table, the orderly pushing a cart with a squeaky wheel that had been squeaking for 2 months. I don't want to consult on systems. I want to be inside one that works. Tate was quiet for a moment. The consulting offer stands, he said. When you're ready. I know. He picked up his coffee. For what it's worth, the panel's private assessment of your testimony. Haverford told me. He looked at her. He said in 30 years of hearings, he'd never had a witness answer a question. By talking about holding an old woman's hand. She didn't say anything. He meant it as a compliment, Tate said. I know what he meant. The public proceedings concluded 7 weeks after the initial hearings. The sentencing phase for the primary target, the immunity agreement voided, the arrest completed. Trial moved through the federal system, with the momentum of something that had been waiting a long time to move was set for the following quarter. Farrell received a preliminary hearing date. The private contract service agreement was permanently terminated, its personnel facing a range of federal charges that the legal record would sort through over the next 18 months. None of it was clean. It never was. The law was not a mechanism for producing clean outcomes. It was a mechanism for producing documented ones. And the documentation was imperfect and slow and sometimes wrong, and always insufficient for the weight of what it was trying to account for. Sarah understood this. She had no illusions about the trial, resolving into something that would feel proportionate to what had been done. 3 men were dead. Her record had been falsified for 3 years. The woman she'd built from necessity had become the woman she actually was, and there was no legal proceeding that could make those years unambiguous or give back to Foote and Rawlings and Martinez what had been taken from them with a wrong set of coordinates and someone's decision to protect their own position. What the proceeding could do, what it did, was put the facts in the light where they could not be managed or diminished or reclassified. That was not nothing. She had decided, somewhere between the federal building in Washington and in the break room on the 3rd floor and the cafeteria conversation with Tate, that not nothing was a legitimate category. That it was in fact the category where most of the actual work of the world got done. The thing that happened 2 months later was not in any official record, and it was not the kind of thing that Tate or Haverford or the IG's inquiry had any interest in. But it was the thing that Sarah thought about afterward, when she tried to locate the moment at which something shifted from the feeling of a situation, resolved, to the feeling of a life resumed. She was in triage on a Thursday morning, working the morning backlog, when Dina Rourke appeared at the station. Dina had known, by this point, the full account. She had been told by Paulson, and then by Voss, and then finally by Sarah herself. In the conversation, Sarah had promised Sue and delivered to Dina separately, because Dina had been the one who'd looked at Sarah Novak for 14 months and seen something closer to the truth than most people in the department had. She had absorbed the information with the practical composure of someone who preferred to recalibrate quietly and fully, rather than dramatically and incompletely. What she said to Sarah at the triage station that Thursday was, "There's a case in Bay 2 I'd like your read on." Not formally, not as a reassignment, just "I'd like your read on." Sarah set down her clipboard and went to Bay 2. The patient was a 23-year-old who had been brought in with what the intake note described as a minor soft tissue injury from a sports collision, but who, when Sarah walked in and took one look at his posture and the way Pulley was holding his left arm against his ribs and the specific quality of his pallor, presented a very different picture. She spent 11 minutes with him. At the end of those 11 minutes, she had identified a partially displaced rib fracture with adjacent pneumothorax, a missed. Pneumothorax was one of the more reliably lethal misses in emergency medicine, particularly in young, healthy patients who compensated well until they didn't. She went back to Dina. Bay 2 needs imaging and a chest consult. Now not scheduled. Dina looked at her. The intake note said soft tissue. The intake note was wrong. Dina held her gaze for 2 seconds. Then she picked up the radio. The patient went to imaging. The pneumothorax was confirmed. He was in a monitored bed within 40 minutes on a treatment protocol. His trajectory substantially changed by 11 minutes, and a nurse who trained not to accept surfaces at face value. He never knew any of that. He just knew he'd come in for what he thought was a sore side and had been told he needed to be admitted. His mother, who arrived while he was being moved to his room, thanked the doctor who happened to be standing near the nurse's station. The doctor accepted the thanks without correcting her. Sarah, charting at the triage station, heard it and felt nothing about it except the specific satisfaction of a thing done correctly, which was its own complete reward, and did not require acknowledgement to be real. Reeves was discharged from his physical therapy rotation 6 weeks after his transfer to Coastal Mercy, cleared for limited duty, pending a formal medical review. His last session happened to fall on a Tuesday, and on his way out of the building, he stopped by the ER. She was in the middle of a shift. He stood at the edge of the department. He didn't come in. He stood at the threshold the way people stood who understood that this space had its own rules. And when she noticed him, she held up one finger without breaking her conversation with the patient in front of her, finished the conversation, finished the documentation, and came to him. He looked better than he'd looked on the 6th floor. Not recovered, he carried his left side with the careful management of someone who knew a thing had been repaired and was not yet certain of its reliability, but present in a way that the hospital bed hadn't allowed him to be, specific presence of someone who was deciding things again rather than just enduring them. Cleared? She asked. Limited. 3 months of desk work. Then review. He made a face about this that told her exactly how he felt about desk work. Then we'll see. That's honest medicine. I hate honest medicine. He looked around the department, the noise, the motion, the specific organized chaos of an ER on a Tuesday shift. You look right in here. I am right in here. He held her gaze. There was something in his expression she recognized from the trauma bay, not the dissociation, not the combat response, but the thing underneath those, the thing that had been there when he'd actually seen her. Recognition of something specific. I don't have a plan, he said. I want to be upfront about that. Whatever comes next for me, the review, the duty status, all of it. I don't have a plan yet. You have time. I know. Just saying he stopped. Try it again. I'm not disappearing. She looked at him. I just want that on record, he said. That I'm not disappearing. Okay, she said. Okay. He looked at her for another moment. Care of yourself, Sarah. You too, Damon. He left. She watched him go, the way you watch someone go, when you understood that the watching was not the end of something, but the gap between one thing and the next. And then she turned back to the department because there was a board full of patients and a shift still running, and that was where she was. The thing about being underestimated is that it is not a condition that resolves cleanly. It doesn't end the day someone apologizes, or the day a record is corrected, or the day an inquiry concludes. It lives in the accumulation of small moments, the ways people look at you before they know what you can do, the assumptions that operate before information catches up with them, spaces in which you exist quietly, and the quiet gets mistaken for absence. Sarah had spent 3 years understanding this from the inside, not as a philosophical abstraction, but as a daily operational reality. You move through a world that has decided what you are before you've had a chance to demonstrate it, and the demonstration, when it comes, is rarely clean or timely or proportionate to the dismissal that preceded it. What she had also learned, what 14 months in a hospital and one very long night had made undeniably clear, was that the dismissal was a condition of the world, not a verdict on the person it was applied to. Voss's assessment of her had been wrong from the first week. That wrongness was his, not hers. It had never been hers. She had carried it the way you carry something that doesn't belong to you when no one else will take it, and you keep moving because there is no other practical option. She had kept moving. The patients had been real. The work had been real. The woman with the anticoagulant bracelet, the young man with the pneumothorax, the 30 or 40 people on any given shift who needed someone to pay attention with the specific quality of attention that training produces. It was real, and it was hers, and it did not require anyone else's recognition to be true. The recognition was good. She was honest enough to acknowledge that. Formal record correction, the hearing, Dina Rourke, saying, "I'd like your read on those things mattered," and she did not pretend they didn't. But the work had mattered before the recognition and would matter after it, and would matter on the days when the recognition was absent and the board was full and Voss was still recalibrating, and the coffee machine was still broken and the shift was long. That was the thing she had not expected to learn in Port Calder. Not the surveillance, not the conspiracy, not the cost of being erased. Those things she had prepared for in one way or another. The thing she hadn't prepared for was the discovery that ordinary work, done with full attention, under conditions of systematic dismissal, without audience or acknowledgement that it still meant something, that it accumulated into something real, that the person it built was someone she recognized. She was at the triage station on a Friday afternoon, 3 months after the hearings, working through a backlog that was 2 patients, deep and growing, when a new admit came through the bay doors, a woman in her 50s, family following, specific expression of someone managing pain that had gone on too long. Sarah was up before the admission note hit the board. She crossed the floor, introduced herself, began the assessment, asked the questions in the order that mattered, and listened to the answers with the full attention of someone who understood that every answer contained more than it said. She was not thinking about Washington or the hearing or the letter in her jacket pocket or the trial date or Reeves or Tate or any of it. She was thinking about the woman in front of her, about what her posture suggested and what the timing of the pain indicated and what the next right step was. That was all. That was, she had decided, exactly enough. She was Captain Hayes, and she was Sarah Novak, and she was the woman who had been dismissed and dismissed and dismissed, and who had remained, each time, entirely herself, And she was in an emergency room in Port Calder, Virginia, doing the thing she was built to do. Not because anyone was watching. Not because it would be acknowledged. Because there was someone in front of her who needed it, and she was the person in the room who could do it best, and no one's failure to see that had ever made it untrue. That was the only power that had ever really mattered. The one no one could classify and no one could erase. She had carried it through everything. She carried it still,